Well, hello everyone. This is Pastor Mike again. It is the 23rd of June, and I'm just recording my weekly check-in. I think the liturgical phrase is that Sunday is going to be proper 8. But before we begin and even start looking at Sunday, one of the things of the check-in is I don't look at Sunday in some ways. Uh, we have Bible study for that, and we record worship and all those other things, but I try to look at some other things. And this week there are actually two interesting things that are going on. One of the things about a church like ours that follows kind of the calendar with liturgy and those sorts of things is that we have days throughout the year where we observe certain things, where we look at people throughout the past that have been good good examples of how to live the faith. And this week we have two close together that are actually kind of central ones. Yesterday, Monday, was Peter and Paul, where the church recognizes the ministry of these two great leaders in spreading the gospel. I mean, Paul and Pete were big. Paul wrote the vast majority of the epistles in the New Testament. Peter was kind of that guiding force in creating, the church and moving the church forward in that way. And it is fascinating to take a moment and just even think about how these two individuals, both highly flawed individuals, became great evangelists and leaders in the church, which I think is often an important thing to remember. We can easily forget that some of the greats did not start out so great. Peter, if we're honest about him, was not the sharpest knife in the drawer when he started following Christ. And a lot of people like it when I say that, but I mean, when you look at some of the events surrounding him, the moment when Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan," to him is usually not a bright, shining moment. The betrayal 3 times or denial, uh, those are not shining moments. But God was not done with such a flawed individual. Paul also as well, persecutor extraordinaire of the early church, Pharisee of Pharisees. He himself is very clear on his failings throughout the letters in numerous ways. But, on the road, he was met by Christ and forever changed and became enemy to ally. And that is, I think, one of the great lessons of how we can look at that. We as people can be very quick to, how do we say, count a person out and view an enemy or someone you disagree with as no mercy. It has become, I think, common in our world. I hear it a lot on TVs and on, news shows, here on the radio, and even some of the Facebook tomfoolery that I try to avoid. It's no holds barred, no redemption, no forgiveness, none of that. But we can see that in Christ there's always this goal of redemption. And as Christians, we should never stand in the path of redemption. Because if something had stood in the path of redemption of those two, two great instruments for the faith would have been lost. Redemption is very important. And Peter and Paul remind us of that. And the call that Christ gives to not harden our heart, but to seek redemption, not just for ourselves, but in those that we might view as, well, not like us. The other interesting one is tomorrow is John the Baptist, who is one of my favorites, not just because of clothing styles and facial hair. I think we are kind of on the same wavelength with both of those. JB has always been a favorite of mine. A fun side note, when I worked at Camp and other places, I was often typecast to play John the Baptist, being loud and having a beard. What are you going to do? But with that, John is also a great, wonderful guy to remember. As Christians, there is two things that I've always liked about John. One, he had this great quote, "He must increase and I must decrease." And John's witness, even though he was the one who came before Christ and paved the way, he was the voice of the one crying out in the wilderness, he knew that his role was always not to be about himself, but to be about God. And even as he knew it was time for Christ to take the driver's seat, he himself needed to, move over. And that's an interesting thing. We can sometimes in our lives wish to have the driver's seat with God, but there are certain moments for our health, our well being. We must follow in John's footsteps. He must increase and I must decrease. And it is part of that which is faithfulness, to turn to, those age old phrases. What would Jesus do? How would God handle this? What is God calling me to be right now? And sometimes that was abandoning certain things. John had to let things go, and he did, and it was good, and it was right. And I always appreciated John for that. And also his simple work. And I've always loved numerous painters, Reformation painters, individuals like that, who always featured John very simply pointing to Christ. In some ways, John is the best example of what a disciple should be. Our existence in many ways should simply to point to Christ and Christ's way, and not point to ourselves, but to point to God. It is always that wonderful reminder. So this week, that is kind of the thing. Remember these three witnesses and what they can remind us to do, because we can often get thrown off the path we are supposed to be on. And these individuals can be signposts and markings on the journey of faith. Just as Christ is the pioneer and perfecter, he has left great witnesses here and there to be these signs to help us on the way. It is good for a look for them. But also as well, there are probably many individuals in your own existence. Maybe add to your prayers thanks for those people. Above all, brothers and sisters, if you need me, give me a holler. We continue to move forward. We continue to find the best way. I know many people have many preferences on the speeds on how we move forward and the ways that we move forward, but I'm very thankful to counsel and people who are willing to find what the best way is, the Goldilocks zone, if you will. The porridge should not be too hot or nor too cold. It should be just right. And finding that, well, we will. With fits and starts, with imperfection, with ups and downs and strikes and gutters, we will continue to move forward at the right pace, at the right time. Sometimes we will have to go with the old adage as we think about it: measure twice, cut once. Nothing wrong with taking your time and doing it right, brothers and sisters. Well, blessings this week. May in moments of worry and fear, you see the signposts that Christ has left for you. Amen.